Hello and welcome to your Wednesday evening weirding session. I'm C. Savory, creator of Fractal Praxis. I've differentiated. I represent a cultural mutation. For long ago, early in my adulthood, I began following a code unrecognized and unvalorized by most everyone around me. In order to discern this code and abide it, I had to go myself into territory unknown. Since my young adulthood, I've been developing what is today a worldview, a body of theory and practical magic entitled Fractal Praxis. Fractal Praxis is about an intimacy with what is, with life, the process and pattern language of life. This is a hidden way. It is not apparent, and it is not a given. To inhabit a fullness of knowledge that explains the world, what is needed to achieve such effectiveness and openness of one's worldview. It looks like first stripping a whole lot more away. Incomplete perceptions, inaccurate stories, insufficient belief systems, inadequate self-identities. Since age 20, I adopted one very powerful tool to strip away superfluous ideas. And since my first transcendental spiritual experience, which I also liken to simply a grand insight experience at age 23, I accessed insight. So these two aspects of stripping away what is less true and doing the cognitive work and the spiritual work to encounter what is more true, these aspects play off of one another, continuously refining me, leading to a robust and extremely intimate relationship with intuition that is perhaps the truest relationship of my entire life. So no wonder I've become somebody divergent. For even to locate the path I'm articulating, one would have to transcend oneself, at least once, probably many times, absorbing all the pain and precarity that comes along with those crossing of thresholds into new, deeper selves. We have to be willing to shed our shallow conditioning if we want to be sculpted by the truth and let it shape our evolution. I believe we adapted over millions of years of evolution to discern what's true and adapt to it. This is literally and simply a way of saying that beings survive and thrive. They do so, and humans in particular do so, through discerning what's true, developing a model of what's true, and in other words, adapting to what's true through an effective model that incorporates that knowledge, and then acting from that model. I hope I'm not saying anything at all radical here. However, sometimes, or even frequently, what is cultural, what is culturally encoded or internalized, diverges from what is strictly true. From birth, we are shaped largely by our cultural conditioning. This conditioning derives from the culture's process of surviving and prospering previously. The culture engages in a logic that becomes imposed onto the shape of our lives. The culture forms a lens through which we view all other information that we encounter and everything we filter out. A culture is like developing an external appendage, an external sense or kind of sight or smell, right? For without concepts, what could we properly perceive in the first place? This cultural appendage then emerges because it gives us an advantage to help us navigate our environments and survive and thrive. This conditioning, if unexamined, comprises our self, which is to say, our story of who and what we are in the world, our story of self and our ego. This is the lens through which we know the world, through which the world is as far as we know, literally as far as we know. Unless and until something disrupts the lens itself, we form a self and we remain a self. Even if we gradually become numb to the ways that we've gotten locked in to an idea, becoming conscripted to a limited life by virtue of our mentally stagnant identities, we live within the self, necessarily. We live our life from that self. And by definition, we struggle to process or even encounter anything that doesn't reinforce who we already determined we are. This is a kind of idea or identity stagnation or lock-in that is facilitated by cultural conditioning. Yet, in times of epic dysregulation at the scale of society and even planetary ecological systems like we are faced with today, we must recognize that we can afford to shed some false stories, skins, and versions of ourselves, some evolutionary baggage, let's say. And in fact, maybe we must, in order to survive in a radically changed landscape. In these circumstances, our identities might become like sodden clothing, baggage that we need to shed if we're going to keep swimming and not drown in this turmoil. Because the more energy that's being funneled into trying to preserve and maintain the self-identities, rather than shifting into actual efficient being as this living, breathing process of existing, the more prone to getting snuffed out you become. In general, or so says my theory, anyway. So in these crisis moments when the aperture of life narrows, where the use of energy becomes that much more consequential, we must be ready to transcend into that open, adaptive state of being, that flow state, and transform in that moment, therefore, into someone more true, someone connected to and adjacent to the who or self you live out of today. They say you can't take anything with you when you die. So from my perspective, why should we lug around a weight-bearing wet blanket of an ego at all, since we would have to release it anyway? What advantages are gained from training ourselves to let go of it now? If you could be freer and more lightweight in your movements. In the viewpoint that I've developed, being is greater than self. Self is a stagnant concept, a noun. It nounifies everything that we are, which inherently distorts the moment-to-moment reality. Whereas being is a living, open process. Being is full of wisdom and love and wonder. Being with being, operating from being, is a kind of adaptive edge. I think. One I hope we awaken to sooner than later. Of course, the Buddhists rightly would debate, as we liberate ourselves, are we becoming free of a self? Or are we becoming more and more effective, sophisticated, and advanced in our self-actualization? That is, enacting a self-identity that is more and more expansive, inclusive, and intelligent, and therefore beneficial to all of one's relations. All I know is you gotta be willing to strip away the bunk information, which today is clogging up everything. It's like swimming in a shit ocean of junk information. I use Occam's razor to strip away unnecessary, useless information. I'll explain how I've used Occam's razor to help liberate me from burdensome belief systems, including conspiracy theories altogether as a category, in a later episode. And then the other side is that you've got to be willing to know. You've got to be willing to experience, to find out, to feel, to sense, to inhabit your body, your mind, your soul, your dreams, and tune yourself to it like an antenna. You've got to be willing to reunify with the flow of life, even at the pain, the cost of the pain of shedding a false self. This is not an easy walk of life, but it is the walk of life that liberates everything, fractally, past and present, ancestors and descendants, and you, and your moment, and your power in this moment, as well as your kin, and frankly, all of your relations in kind. There are thresholds to this path of liberation. You can expect to get threshed, if not thrashed, every time you cross over one, threshing the wheat from the chaff. You will be purified into being more whole, into being of greater service with your being to the whole. Yourself sublimated and submissive to the capital S self, which encompasses us all, and all our meaning, and all our destinies. So which self do you serve? What are you enacting and pursuing? Who will you become, and who will you be in the mirror of we? And what, if anything, do you find there is to see in the mirror of me? I deduce and label myself a cultural mutation that, by definition, will stir up the unexamined in you and may even set in motion a climax-like cascade of loss of assumptions, that is, disillusionment, and or its counterpart, revelation. My walk through my life spins these out in its wake because all I'm ever doing is immersing in that very process, reveling in the revelations, befriending my losses of disillusionment. I can't help but splatter, splash, and stir up a bit of these same waters onto your existence through my existence. I love the revelatory process, and I embrace it because it has both saved and redeemed my life. I love how life gets better as a result of profound learning processes, which is really what life is all about, I believe. I grew up in a patently toxic culture that did a poor job of explaining reality or helping me navigate it. So it's no surprise that I embarked on a journey to go beyond myself. I literally felt the survival pressure to get out of that circumstance and shape my own destiny. I remember being an adolescent or teen around the time when I realized that none of the adults around me seemed to know what was really going on. Meaning, in terms of their own life, or in terms of like what this whole society was supposed to be about, what life was supposed to be about. It's as if nobody knew, and I felt very on my own in that moment. No one could help me, and no one seemed to want to. So if I wanted to know, what life could be beyond this, I would necessarily have to go beyond the edges of their horizons, beyond and into the fringes of society, the wisdom retained and circulated there, crossing thresholds of not knowing and daring and knowing and encountering alike, being shaped like a rock is shaped by caressing water over time, by every single experience I lived through and the meaning I took from it. Thus I diverged into a new self many times over, cresting and falling into an edgeful yet today rising culture. I took a wandering journey to differentiate from my culture of origin because I suffered greatly and chronically from the toxic normal it imprinted me with. Self-loathing seemed to be the foundation of its logic. Hierarchy, oppression, a general unwelcome, a needing to earn one's worth and one's right to exist. Consumerism and social conformity as the only available identities, and TV media and junk food's empty calories to assuage the soul's unrest. Being anxious and depressed was the norm. Dysregulation was the norm and the constant. On my own, I started co-regulating with the process of learning, of wonder, of inquiry. Eventually, this would lead to a really rich, direct relationship with life itself, with reality, with the world. Transcribing, deducing, then ascribing to a logic intrinsic. Pursuing the most elegant, refined rules for the most universal good. A way of being, a set of disciplines, practices, techniques, sensitivities, thought processes, and attunements developed carefully throughout the course of many years. This is my cultural mutation, and these I intend to unfurl and share with you, dear listener and reader. Overall, this pathway of co-regulating with curiosity, with wonder, and with encounter, with the unknown, with that which is beyond your horizons, is available to all people right now. This ecstatic climax and resolution process is available to all through wanting to learn something beyond what you ever knew. This is available to all sentient beings. And the more we engage with it, the more we make our lives and make ourselves. We become people capable of transcending any problems and dilemmas, no matter how sticky or complex, through this powerful route to insight and to enacting skillful means. I want you to become this person because you'll benefit your society. And I want it for you because you will experience thriving. You will experience less cognitive dissonance, more ease, more belonging, more self-actualization and fulfillment, more mastery and more bliss. In the next talks, I'll get more into the beliefs that shaped me from my adolescence and the tools and beliefs that I adopted early in my journey around ages 20 to 21 that set me up for such a divergence that I've cultivated ever since. This cultural mutation I offer with love from Fractal Praxis.